Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast, this IAGB Youth Podcast. So, if you don't know what we are a youth community-oriented group. We obviously operate under the parent organization, the India Association of Greater Boston. So, we really, as a youth group, we focus on community activities and spreading our opinions, our thoughts, and just pushing that through with different projects, our podcast series being one of them. So obviously today we're really excited because we have a guest speaker here. I'm going to pass it on to our various speakers so that they can introduce themselves, and then our guest speaker will tell you some more about what they're here to talk about.
All right, everybody. I'm excited to announce our sixth podcast. I'm Shory Gupta, rising senior. I'm excited to get started.
My name is Chinmay Rana. I'm a rising senior at Shrewsbury High School, and I participate in the activities at Boss Lab, so I'll be sharing my input today.
Hi everyone, my name's Nipun. I'm a rising senior from Franklin High School, and I'm so excited. Always interested to talk about stuff like this, science. It's continuation with politics or just community in general. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, my name's Serena Ton. I'm a rising freshman, and I love debate and genetics and science in general, and I can't wait to get started.
Hi, my name's Wendy Pouliot, and I'm president of Boss Lab, which stands for Boston Open Science Lab, and we are a DIY community science lab with the mission to make science accessible to everyone. So we operate a biosafety level 1 molecular biology lab that is open to teens and adults in the community at large.
I think this is our main topic of today's podcast, these community science labs. So like in today's world where science has become super advanced, sometimes focused on disease research, sometimes on technological advancements, let's start with this question. Where does community and citizen science fit into further progressing, science in general?
It's a fabulous question. I have lots of opinions, of course, and might be slightly biased. So I'm interested in all hearing your answers and feedback too. I think, when you look at science as a whole, so I'm a trained neuroscientist. I have a PhD in neuroscience and did drug discovery and clinical drug discovery and drug development research for many, many years in academia. And now I'm more intimately involved with these community labs, which are actually part of a global network of labs. We all are run by independent individuals and groups, and we're shaped by the communities that we operate in. But we are all umbrellaed under the mission to make science accessible to everyone. And so because I've had both the experience of being a trained professional in the field of science and at the same time working in academics, I know a little bit about, a lot about that world. And now I'm sort of new to the DIY community lab space, but I think it's just, it's amazing in its mission, what it's trying to do. And I think it's going to play an integral part in advancing science as a whole. I think we've talked earlier that, science is typically pretty closed. It's closed to even individuals who get degrees in science. I might have gotten a biology degree in science, and then I went off to do something else after that. But I went and got a biology degree in science, and because I obviously loved it. But maybe now I'm in some other field and I don't have the opportunity to do science anymore. So that's what I mean by it's closed to even people who get training. It's close to the public. Whether you want to participate in something or maybe you have a great idea to solve a real world problem or just a problem in general. You have this observation of something that's in your environment and you want to really look more into it and look for answers. There really are no spaces for you to go to do that. Now, citizen science is trying to fill that void. And I would argue that that's a great movement for society as a whole. And I think community labs have the opportunity to take that even one step further from citizen science projects.
Now, Ms. Pouliot, before we dig deeper into these specific missions or these specific goals, can we sort of touch upon what exactly citizen science is and these community centers for our listeners that may not have heard of them before and what their mission is as of right now?
Sure. Citizen science is a relationship where you usually have some project that a scientist has designed, and they're harnessing the power of the people to collect the data. So that's a lot of I would say, the majority of the citizen science projects that people, the general public, have access to participate in are based on that. So they're designed by a scientist, and they're using people to collect that data. So a lot of them are ecology based, right? Because that's really easy to have citizens go collect that. I'll give you an example. Butterfly migration, monarch flight migration. There are citizen science projects where you can go into your yard and take pictures of the monarch butterflies and count them. So things like that, ecology-based projects where you're counting an animal or an insect that you might come across in your own backyard or walking to work or whatnot. And usually it's associated sometimes with software where you'll take a picture and then that gets uploaded. And so a lot of the citizen science projects that are out there are very much like that, where the project is designed by a scientist, but you help them collect the data. And that's fantastic because they're able to collect data from across the country or globe very quickly by having everyday people participate. So that's kind of what citizen science projects typically are. I would argue that they could morph into more, and I think some already are, and that they could be designed by the public, right? Designed by an individual in their community, and also harvest, or harness the local community's help to collect that data. But the public would be part of every step of it. So right now, if you participate in one and you take pictures and you upload it, you may or may not see what the end result of all that data was. You're certainly not part of analyzing that data, right? You're just a data collector. And so what I think, is really important as we move forward is to really engage people and have them understand the entire process from, how do I start a project? How do I even know what data I should collect? How am I going to analyze that data when I collect it? And how important is that data? And how do I put that data together so that it is a foundation for some field that other studies could build on? That's the challenge of really bringing citizens into the world of science. I think we've done a great start, but I think we need to do more. We need to do more. It's not just, you're collecting the data and that's great. And maybe you might see the numbers at the end, but you don't have a full appreciation for the whole process. And your role is really limited.
I think another aspect of it is obviously the scientific process is much more than just the collection of data, right? And for the larger goals of having science being more open and more understood even by the public, I think that definitely reducing it to just that one aspect is doing a disservice to the process itself and to the education that is being given out about it. So I think definitely having community labs, which we can move on to as our next point, as a aid to that, or as almost like a counterpoint to what citizen science is currently. How do community labs do it differently?
Well, that's another great question. So I think the benefit that community labs have is that they're rooted in your community. And so a lot of citizen science projects, you can get involved. There are a lot of websites that you can go and you can join them, and they're national, right? You can walk into your community lab and, right away you can be talking to either scientists, trained scientists, or like-minded science enthusiasts, citizen scientists, so you have a much more intimate relationship with them. They also have a lab. They have a functional space where you can come and do science. And that's something you don't see in these other citizen science projects. It's usually the data collection is done, using your phone or a computer or whatnot, whereas, because we actually run a physical lab, a physical space, you can come to the space and be part of that data collection, be part of designing it, be part of analyzing it, and doing the actual work, of collecting the data and analyzing the data. There are some citizen science projects where you can go out and collect microbes and you send the samples in. In our space, you can come in and learn how to do PCR to determine what microbes you just collected. So it's just taking it that next big step forward, and really giving you the opportunity to do hands-on science. And I think that's what the true benefit of these spaces are, to the public and to society. And I think out of that, these spaces are places for, um, discovery and innovation. Every one of us is curious about something or is passionate about something that is usually a problem that we'd like to solve or an observation we've made and we'd like to explore. And these spaces are going to give you the opportunity to do those things. And I think that's what sets it aside from some of these larger national citizen science projects.
Yeah, and to go along with that, those national citizen science projects, you know, to like a citizen, at home that might not feel like science.
Mhm.
They might be thinking like, okay, yeah, I'm doing all this data collection. I'm counting these animals. I'm, figuring out if this is a star or not. But, they don't know where that, help is leading to. And I think with these community labs, especially on the smaller scale, because they can, kind of be at the forefront of those experiments, they can, understand what is the basis of those experiments. And I think that's one of the major points of that community lab is that these people have accessibility.
Yep.
And beyond that, I mean, the value proposition is really, really like appealing too. In terms of if you have a grad student that hasn't had time to, work in a lab, and many other people that are like really yearning for an opportunity to actually engage in that type of science, it's nearly like it's super low cost, super like open. You have an entire community at your fingertips. Like I'm sure that there's a lot of resistance to that because of how good of a proposition it is. So what types of resistance do you guys face as a community lab?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know that big science uses this as competition, but I do think the resistance you have to community labs really stems from the biohacking movement. And the biohacking movement has a lot of great things, right? I mean, community labs started from the biohacking movement, right? We started from a group of people who were working in their garages on their own projects. They could buy equipment off of eBay and do their science, right? They were trying to either hack something or understand something or learn something. And then they got together and they said, hey, if we get together, you have a PCR machine, you have a gel electrophoresis, we're greater if we work together. So it kind of went from, do it yourself in your own garage, biohacking, to, do it together. And so that's the history of these groups. But what you do get a little bit with the biohacking group is you have had some individuals who unfortunately receive a lot of public attention who have done things to inject themselves with things. They're trying to change their bodies. These things that are really kind of dangerous in the wrong hands kind of thing. And so the one resistance we do get, I think, from community labs a little bit is the biosecurity aspect of it, right? As people learn that, you can order things off the internet and get them sent to you, could you come up with something that would be detrimental to you or society? And could you inject yourself or unleash something on the environment? And so unfortunately, I think the one thing that, is that we get kind of connected to that because community labs started with that biohacking movement. We clearly don't condone that kind of behavior. And in fact, there's never ever been an incident of anything bad that has been associated with a community lab. But that is one thing I think that we get resistance in the general public, because people start getting worried. Okay, well, if everyone can do it, maybe someone could, inadvertently do something that's dangerous. It turns out to probably do something pretty dangerous, you actually have to be pretty knowledgeable. Someone in the public is not going to recreate, polio virus. I mean, that's just not possible, right? And now there are safeguards in place, but even those things could come out of academic labs, right? I mean, lots of things can happen, but so I think the only resistance we really get from the community, and not the community at large, but as when you look and consider the public perception of these spaces, sometimes we get associated with these, biohackers who have done some pretty nefarious stuff that is just, it's for publicity, and it's not been good for them, and it's not good for the movement.
Yeah, and I think another question stems out from that is like people who participate in these labs, is the stuff they're doing valid? Do they need a certain level of expertise to be able to, conduct these types of experiments, or, do their own thing? Because if there's a safety issue that, might not happen most of the time, it might be only in some cases, but, do you think there should be some level of expertise required, or maybe, some training that is involved?
Yes, as someone who runs a community lab, yes, I would sleep better if everyone is trained. And then we have a very rigid training program. So I think what the community lab space does is it brings together trained scientists and the public. And so with the trained scientists, what you get is those years of safety training, skill training, knowledge, all of that can be transferred to the public, so that they can, if they have this fantastic idea, they can really root out how to go about doing it, right? Because that's the business that we're in, right? Is we're very well trained in the scientific methods, setting up and designing experiments and analyzing data and all of that. And so that's the knowledge that we can pass down to someone who is not a trained scientist. And safety is really important. Safety is really important. Just because you can buy it on the internet doesn't mean it's safe, right? For all kinds of things. And that includes lab equipment and things like that, just knowing the hazards and whatnot. And there are chemical hazards, just because you can order something doesn't mean you should have it in your house, and that's what these spaces do. We provide you access to all of that in a safe, controlled environment. And so, for some people who may not naturally have that sort of safety mindedness, and that they're going to really research, or they even know how to get that information, they can come to us and do their work with us in a very safe and controlled environment. And we can help advance them. So the other half of your question is, can you do real science? I love this question, because you get this all the time, I think, when people look at these spaces. Well, it's a hobby, great. What are they really doing? And there's a really great example of a project called the Open Insulin Project that started between two labs in the California area, BioCurious and I'm blanking on the other one. It will come to me. And it was a group of people that came together, not all trained scientists, said, hey, we want to tackle a real world problem. And they wanted to tackle insulin and the cost of insulin, because insulin has been made using genetically modified organisms for like 20 years. And so it really should be off patent. It should be really cheap, should be easy for everyone to get. Turns out it's not. The two companies that own the patents tweak the metabolic pathway of how it's generated, and then they repatent it, and they're able to keep the price high. It should be cheap. So this group said, you know what? We can reconfigure the metabolic pathway and make it open source. And then maybe a generic company will pick it up and make it easy, much more accessible and even cheaper. And I think the actual idea that with the use of synthetic biology is that someday you might make your insulin in your own house, right? It could be that easy. And it could be that safe, because you're making it with, really friendly stuff like yeast, almost like baker's yeast. So here's a group that's, a collection of trained scientists and other professionals, or just other individuals from the public who are just passionate about a really big problem, right? This is a huge problem. People are dying because they don't have enough money to pay for their insulin, and they can do something right away. They're harnessing not just their lab, but they're actually, anybody at any of the community spaces can participate in this. And they've gone off and started their own foundation and received money to forward this. So here's an example of a citizen science project that started in a community lab's gone much larger. and is really tackling a huge problem. I think that's just such a great example of, yes, you can do real science in these spaces.
And going along with that, I mean, it seems like the work being done at community labs, especially, is more than likely to be free of all of the corporate tinge and all of the grant money and all of that comes along with the politics of working in an actual university as well as in an actual corporation. Which I mean, in my opinion, those type of roadblocks often hinder progress in terms of things that are most important to people just for the sake of profit. So I think that definitely community labs might be the way forward in that regard.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, the spirit of which community labs was founded on is really open source. Now, in our own group, we also act as a bioincubator. So we have people who have an idea, are trying to sort of get that proof of concept. Will this idea really work? Do they have parts of it that will work that they can then graduate on and have their own individual companies? Some of them already have an established company. So you do have that portion, but there is the spirit of a lot of it was open source and still is, I think. And you're right, we don't have the trappings of the politics. You do eventually have the trappings of the money because you got to pay for supplies and stuff, but how you raise that and what you choose to do with it is really driven by you. I know people who have done sort of GoFundMe pages to raise money to do their project, and there are some fundraising sites that you can do, and people will support this if they really think you're trying to solve a problem that's important to them. And so you're right. It really, because it's an open science. It's open to everyone, and it starts from that philosophy. You don't have a lot of the trappings that you would have working in either industry or in academia. There's a lot more freedom, but you still have to do some fundraising if you're trying to get your project to the next level.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question really similar to along lines of Chinmay, that is there any state or local or federal funding that goes towards these citizen centers as of right now? And if there isn't, should there be, or why shouldn't there be?
It's a great question. Yes, so it turns out that a lot of these places are funded either through they have a couple different business models. Usually it involves some membership, so people pay a fee and that helps support the organization. It's usually a mixture of corporate sponsorships. And then, the national government is actually now funding some of these spaces. So GenSpace, who's located in New York, has a grant from the National Science Foundation to sort of work on educating teens on synthetic biology, and that helps them run their space. And you're starting to see NIH and NSF realize that there is something to these spaces, and they're looking now to start to set aside money for these spaces, but it's really in its infancy. I think that there are a few pilot programs and those have been successful, and I'm hoping that will drive them to increase the amount of money that can go to these spaces. I think that they realize now, these spaces aren't going anywhere, right? I mean, they've been around since 2009, 2010. They're growing in number and size, similar to like maker spaces. And they're going to have an important role in the future of science and training and recruiting future people to science. And so, I definitely think there should be more money set aside. I'm probably a little biased, but I do think that both at the government level and at the local level, these spaces are starting to attract enough attention that money is starting to be given to these spaces.
Yeah, in terms of,
you go ahead.
But in terms of sources of funding, I mean, I remember we were discussing earlier about how universities, though they may sponsor events like give space, they usually do not actually support the labs themselves.
No, I don't know of any lab that receives any direct money from a local university, and I think that's maybe the university has its own priorities of where its money goes to, and in some ways, maybe universities see us as they don't know what we are yet, how we fit in with them. I would argue that we could have a very close relationship. So an example is we often get people from MIT that come to us wanting to do work that they can't do in a lab at MIT because, maybe they're an engineer or they're in the business department. And so as a result, they come to us because we have the lab space and the training to help them get to a project. So there needs to be some work done to build better relationships, with local universities.
Yeah, and along with universities, I know medical centers nowadays have started to, increase that collaboration idea. I know the Ann Romney Center that I recently learned about, where they, encourage that collaboration between neurologists to, find the root cause of different neurological diseases. And I think if that's seen on a bigger scale, then definitely that kind of idea would be echoed throughout community labs as well, and, local things that increase the popularity of these citizen science projects.
I would add that we could even be a value at the community college level because, in some ways we might have equipment or that community colleges just don't have access to, so that these spaces could, we could collaborate with a community college to offer a lab component to something that they're teaching because maybe they don't have the resources.
Yeah, definitely. Nibla and Serena, you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I was actually not as if Serena has something, she can go first. I can wait.
So I think that's definitely important. And do you think that's kind of the next big step for these community labs to kind of expand even more and kind of give materials to these colleges and other places that are working on science?
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle for a lot of these spaces is we don't have a national organization that ties us together. We're sort of like the United States, a bunch of individual labs and individual states, and so we all have our own personality, etc. I think for us, community labs need a national organization that handles the sort of integrating us on the national level, right? There are lobbyists in Congress that lobby for local, for universities. Not that we need someone lobbying, but at least someone at the national level that is educating the public and getting the word out, that we're a growing movement. There are labs across the country. There might even be a lab in your city or town. And so I think that's the next big step for these community labs is to really get some sort of national movement together that ties us more closely together and then advocates on our behalf at a national level.
Honestly, I think that if something like that were to happen, it would be really historic in terms of openness of science. I mean, throughout history, I can't remember there being a singular time where science was on this track to being this accepting and this open. So I'm really excited to see where this is going to go.
Yeah, just sort of one more kind of wrap question. Are you aware of any other community centers in the greater Boston area that students such as myself could turn to other than BOSS Labs? Or how can we get involved with BOSS Labs just for people who are interested?
So yes, there are some other spaces that teens specifically can go to. There are learning labs that are run by Novartis has a learning lab that is for teens to come in and work on their science fair projects. Biogen does a lot. They have an in-person, although it's gone virtual over COVID. BioBuilders, which is run by Natalie Cadell, is also open to teens. I think most of those programs, what they have in common, there's, you can do internships like at the Broad Institute. Those are some of the local, programs that you can be involved in. What I think where we kind of help with those is that you might go in and get the skills. Those are usually programs that are contained to just a few weeks or 6 weeks. And then, after that, you're kind of done your project. What I like about the community labs and how I think it fills a void there is that you could go and get those skills at any one of those programs and then either come back to us or get the skills from us and stay with us. If you have a project that you're passionate about and you want to work on, or you want to keep doing this kind of stuff, you can stay in our space. So I think that sets us apart a bit. But there are other programs, other learning labs that are usually funded by either universities will have a little learning program, or some, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies are running these kind of short introductory programs. And if you want to be part of Boss Lab, you can just contact me. It's wendy@bosslab.org. Like I said, we're open to everyone. This is our first year of taking in teens, and we're super excited because we have a great batch of teens. So
Yeah, everybody get involved. There's so many opportunities nowadays.
yeah.
Alrighty. No, it was a pleasure having you, Wendy.
Thank-
Join us for the podcast today. I thoroughly enjoyed.
Thanks, you guys. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you also to the audience for listening.
Alrighty.
Join your local community science lab.
Yes, do that.
Thanks, you guys.
All right, everybody. Goodbye.